Welcome back for another episode of Market Snapshot, where we're recapping last month's numbers and everything real estate. So, Ruben, as always, we have some key topics to talk about. So what's most important this month?
Yeah, so we're going to start it as usual with our existing home sales report, talk about what happened in June and kind of what it means for the industry. We're going to talk a little bit about the state of the consumer in a sense, kind of what's going on with unemployment, what's consumer spending been doing. And then that's going to help us then segue into what's happening with the Federal Reserve. There's been some tone shifts recently in the last couple of weeks there that are really important, that are going to affect us over the coming months. And we'll kind of dig into that and its implications for mortgage rates.
Okay. And I know everybody will be interested in hearing that. But let's start, as you said, with the numbers of where are we today based on what happened last month. And sadly, it wasn't great news, was it?
Yeah, so sales definitely slowed down last month. Why, we'll get into a little bit, we'll see. But we were down to 3.9 million annualized home sales in June.
Ouch.
It's a mixed thing, because we all know we need some adjustment right now. So we're kind of in a transition period where we're moving from, this sort of seller's market to this more of a balance to buyer's market kind of situation. There's going to be some bumps in that road as we go through it, right? And either way, we're in a very suppressed market even as that transition happens. Home prices were still up last month, up 4% year over year. That's less than it was the month before, right? We were almost 6% in May. So that's, in a sense, moving in the right direction. We need home prices to moderate. And we saw inventory come up some as well. We were up about 3% from last month, almost 25%. It was 23.5%, I think, year over year in terms of the total number of homes that were for sale at the end of the month. That's good news. We need inventory to move into the market. We have a pretty serious shortage of inventory right now. And in general, we need more homes for sale and existing homes. We also need more construction, right?
Absolutely.
So all of this starts to move, hopefully, in that direction.
That's the hope, right? I mean, we've talked about the pent-up demand before. So focusing on what's happening right now, I just want to reiterate to any of the folks who haven't been watching, we've had this happening for the last year or so where inventory is rising. It's definitely rising now. We've seen a big increase, like you said, but home prices are still going up. So what I heard you say in there is that it seems to be tapering off and that it's not quite as a large increase as it has been. So maybe at some point we're going to hit that balance where we really do kind of stagnate on the price increases, which, as you said, would be a good thing.
Right. And we're at 4.1 months of inventory right now. That's, the highest in terms of month supply we've had since, I think it was May of 2020.
Wow.
So that's notable, right? We're moving back toward a more normal inventory situation. It's in a situation where both inventory and sales are very low, but the two things are starting to come more into balance. And that's where we're going to get a slowdown in home prices into what we consider more typically balanced market in terms of prices. We think, 2 to 4%.
Makes sense.
If we could get down into that 2% range, it would do us some good right now, frankly, as we start moving toward a market where people are going to start re-entering, hopefully, as mortgage rates start to come down.
What I think is really key that everybody should be aware of is right now, when inventory is as high as it is, and sales are as low as they are, it's a ripe opportunity for buyers to really get creative in how they're negotiating a deal and what sellers need to be aware of that they may need to give up in order to make a sale happen right now if they're in the market currently.
Yeah, exactly. It's a really important time, I think, for buyers to be educating themselves, for buyer agents to, really be keeping a pulse on what the negotiating levers are right now in the market. Because we're seeing buyers asking for more as they get more leverage, things like closing costs, paying for inspections, that kind of stuff that was actually fairly normal coming into the pandemic, right? It's now starting to come back. And so basically that entire normalization where, we may have some agents in the market that have never existed in that world yet that are going to have to start kind of learning what the tools are in a sense if they're newer agents. So it's a good time to start educating yourself there. And for buyers to take advantage of agents that understand those levers and understand that they're going to start having more negotiating power going into these conversations.
Absolutely. Such an important point. And I know that we've got different things going on in different parts of the country. So is there anything interesting or unique about what's happening in the Northwest versus the South?
Yeah, so there's still a lot of regional variation. Start with just prices, because I think it's where you can kind of see it the most obviously. In the South right now, prices year over year are only up 1.7%. That's fairly much slower than a lot of other places, right? Looking at the Northeast, 9.7%.
Wow.
So that in itself should tell you a little bit about like what inventory looks like in those two places.
Sure.
In terms of sales, we're also seeing some variation. Sales are down almost 11% in the South. Looking at other places, the West looks a little bit more like the average part of the country right now in a sense, though there are parts of California where prices are increasing in double digits. So even inside of those regions, we're seeing like variations, right?
As you really made it clear here, there are different things going on in different parts of the country. And at the same time, we've got to really educate ourselves on what the market is like if you're a seller, so that you know how to activate the right set of eyes on your property. And if you're a buyer, you've got lots of opportunities to negotiate things and be strategic about what you're doing in your pursuit of buying a home. So knowing all of that is in place, it sounds like we should jump into what about those buyers and sellers? What does consumer sentiment look like right now?
One of the biggest things going on right now is what we call is like a softening in the labor market. Unemployment has moved up to about 4.1% from, we were at lows in the low threes at one point during the pandemic after we recovered from it. So that's a trend that's gotten a lot of attention, especially from the Federal Reserve. We'll get to that in a minute of like the implications there. But what it also means is that, people had been moving jobs very easily before. Now you hear a lot of stories of people filling out hundreds of job applications to get a handful of interviews. People are staying in place much more often versus job hopping like they had been to get more money before. So people feel that, right? Like they feel a little bit less mobile, they feel a little less secure. And it starts to put pressure on spending. We've seen consumer balance sheets also under a little bit of pressure with things like default rates on credit cards moving up. We've even seen default rates on mortgages move up a bit. They're still in the low normal range because we're coming off of essentially all-time lows, but the trend is moving up. So that's something we have to watch. And as kind of the debt side of consumer spending gets pressure on it as, rates have gone up and they start to kind of see their balance sheet stressed a little bit, it's going to slow down things in the general economy potentially as well. So that's what the Fed is kind of looking at right now.
It sounds like to me the good side of this is the economy as a whole is having to take a second look at what's going on. It's not just real estate. It's not just credit card spending. It's starting to look like a more full picture that things are starting to maybe slow a little bit.
Yeah, so that's where some of the good news comes in. CPI this past month, it moved down to 3%. The Fed's target is 2%. Core CPI was 3.1. Both of those came down more than expected.
Great news.
And that combined with, hitting that 4% unemployment threshold, that upward trend seems to have shifted tone in the FOMC, which is the committee that decides our monetary policy. When the chairman, Jerome Powell, was testifying before Congress, he said several times that he viewed essentially the risk between the Fed's two mandates as now coming in balance. And what that means is this, that they have two mandates. One is full employment in the economy. The other is their 2% inflation goal. Up to this point, all of the risk has been that inflation increases at an increasing rate, right? That's where their fear was. They weren't worried about employment because it was so low. The fact that they're saying they're more in balance now means that they feel much more confident that inflation's under control and that they're starting to worry a little bit about what's happening with employment, which means the odds they're going to decrease rates much higher now.
That seems like great news. And the balance is also good news, right? It means inflation, as you said, is under control, which should help consumers understand how to better budget what's happening in their world right now. They're not looking at runaway inflation on all the things that used to be groceries and cars and all kinds of fun stuff. So if all of that's coming into balance and the Fed is feeling more confident that it's likely to reduce rates, that seems like good news for the real estate industry in general. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as we move away from very tight monetary policy, our situation will very likely improve. The better the economy is able to fare through that, the better. But any transition into lower rates is going to benefit us and just people in general who are looking to buy homes.
Absolutely.
Homes are one thing that the high interest rates aren't going to lower the cost of.
No.
Right. There's too much pent up demand. There's not enough supply coming on the market to balance out the fact that when rates go up, it increases payments so much.
Right.
It'd be one thing if we saw tons of supply coming on the market, prices were coming down like they are with some consumer goods to balance out those interest rates. But that's just not how our world works these days.
Sadly, no.
So that's the good news. The bad news, just a little bit, is that we have to see if the Fed kind of waited too long, right? Rates have been high for quite some time now. We've seen how that's pressured our market. So as we start to transition, if they waited too long to lower rates, there's a chance that the economy will suffer more than needed. So we may see unemployment come up more than expected. We may see some other effects in terms of like slower growth. But we'll have to see. And the economy goes in cycles, even though we may see some pain short term, it may be good in the long term. We'll have to see how it balances out.
Yeah. Well, and you said this before, Ruben, and if someone's watching that hasn't been watching us regularly, you said we really had hit the bottom, but how wide is the bottom was the big question. The width has been all year so far, and it sounds like depending upon now not just rates, but how the economy overall is doing is going to play into where we go next. Good news, bad news, we're kind of at the bottom. There really isn't much further to fall. As I say, good news, bad news. Good news is the hope that the Fed is going to help us balance this back out. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I mean, if you look at kind of existing home sales, like the annual history that we always show on the slide, you can see going back in the early 90s and also after the Great Recession, these periods where we had these big declines in home sales. And it was pretty typical for them the last 4 to 5 years. So if we can get out shorter than that, we should be pretty grateful and consider, things went fairly well for us, even though we had a couple of very difficult years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, on that note, we will close out our conversation for today. And thank you, as always, Ruben, for bringing this great information. And thank you for tuning in. And please don't forget to subscribe. You will not want to miss a minute of what we're going to talk about going into the end of the year. And we hope to see you soon.